It's been a wee while since I posted an update about Starmaul, which is the 1 versus 1 tower defense game I've been building. So what have I been up to? Well, quite a few different things. I've been experimenting with several game mechanics, many of which probably won't make it into the final game, but I thought I'd highlight some of the more interesting ones I've been trying. Starmaul takes place in a river. As you build towers, the shape of the river adjusts and the attackers, which flow along the river's surface, have their path diverted. But if we're restricting the width of the river, shouldn't the river flow faster in those areas? And wouldn't that make the attackers also move faster? Well, I tried it out. I did a really basic fluid simulation, if you can even call it that. It's not at all physically correct, but it was good enough to get a feel for the gameplay impact. This mechanic was reasonably interesting and made for some cool trade-offs. The problem was that it was very hard to predict, particularly if you were planning to build several towers in quick succession. It would be hard to know what the impact on attacker speed would be. Now I can tune the magnitude of the speed impact, but this game mechanic was in a slightly awkward spot. If it had a large impact on gameplay, then understanding the fluid simulation would become critical to your strategy. The skill floor would skyrocket. On the other hand, if I made it a fairly low impact game mechanic, it just felt weird, like there was a bug causing the attacker speed to be inconsistent. In the end, I decided to cut it as a gameplay mechanic. I'm still using it for rendering though. I have little bubbles and such traveling along the river. It might be hard to see in the video as it's pretty subtle, but I really like it and it was definitely worth the time I invested into it. One of the big inspirations behind Starmaul is the board game Go. If you're not familiar with it, I'd recommend looking it up, but basically it's a board game with an extraordinarily simple rule set. There's only one type of piece, no pawns or knights or rooks or whatever, but the rules of the game still allow for a huge amount of strategic depth. When I was making Starmaul, I was trying really hard to emulate Go, and was attempting to see if I could make a really interesting and strategic game even if there was only one type of tower. Well, it turns out that trying to make a game as elegant as Go as your very first game is pretty ambitious. So I decided to go pretty much in the opposite direction and tried out as many different tower types as I could. I created a separate branch of the game so I could be super reckless and sloppy about the code quality. I branched off an older version of the game too, where the code was simpler, particularly for the rendering. This kinda indicates a problem with my process, that I'm going backwards like this, but it's actually working out fine, so I'm not too fussed. Now there's your usual assortment of towers in these types of games. The splash damage tower, the slow tower, the sniper tower. I did try these out and they were all fine, but not particularly exciting or interesting. I wanted towers that interacted with the existing mechanics, like the layout and geometry of your defenses. This next tower type was partially inspired by an Overwatch character called Doomfist. Doomfist has an ability where he charges up a punch, which, when it hits an enemy, deals a small amount of damage and sends that enemy flying backwards. If that enemy then collides with a wall, they will take a huge amount of extra damage. I actually kind of hate this character in Overwatch, but this ability interacts with the level geometry, which is something I was looking for. My tower version of Doomfist would fire in all directions simultaneously, sending all nearby enemy attackers flying backwards and, as you may have guessed, deals a good amount of bonus damage if it sends that enemy into a wall. The rendering for all the towers I was prototyping was fairly minimal. My goal was just to assess them as cheaply as possible. So you may need to use some imagination for the visuals, but I'll do my best to explain what each tower does. The Doomfist tower was pretty fun. It was quite satisfying to destroy a bunch of attackers at once, and it added a variable to consider when positioning your towers. These next couple of towers I tried are pretty related to each other. I wanted to increase the interaction between players and have more things the players would need to adapt to throughout the course of the game. Both of these towers impact your opponent's tower in the corresponding position to where they're placed. So if I put it in the bottom left of my defense area, it will interact with the opponent's tower in the bottom left of their defense area. What did they do? Well, one of them, the Disabler, just completely nullified the enemy tower. It wouldn't do anything at all. The other one, the Phaser, still allowed the enemy tower to function, but your attackers could path straight through it as if it wasn't there. These towers did have the desired effect of increasing player interaction and forcing them to adapt. I was testing it out against the AI, who just chooses tower types at random at the moment, and it just completely owned me with it. However, both of these towers did feel a bit awkward to use. I think maybe the fact that you're placing the tower on your own board, so that's like where you're looking, but you mostly care about the impact on the enemy board, and it's also not very intuitive. I'm thinking I'll try to get the effect of these towers by another means, like special support abilities or something. These are just a few of the tower types I've been trying. I've also played around with towers that produce units, beacons that enemies will pass through before getting to your base, towers that shoot all enemies in a line. I have a spreadsheet with 100 or so different tower types I want to try. I'm still trying to keep the number of towers in the game fairly minimal though, so it's probably going to take quite a bit of iteration to find the right set of towers for Starmaul. In line with my goal of increasing player interaction and requiring the player to adapt, I played around with allowing players to build towers in the enemy's defense area. The towers would then battle it out with each other. This was pretty fun, especially with the different tower types. It kind of felt like playing Go with chess pieces. But it was also really weird, at least in the form that I was trying it. I allowed players to freely build in either defense area. This kind of broke the concept of my defense area and enemy defense area. The only difference was which side the win condition was on. So it felt like playing a combination of Go and chess, except that I was playing 2 games of Go chess at the same time. It also made for pretty degenerate strategies of just spamming down towers as fast as possible. I found that when I tried to address these issues, the game either slowly ended up becoming more of a standard RTS game, or if I tried to simplify it, then it just started turning into Go. My plan at the moment is to either only allow this ability in a very limited way, or more likely just drop it entirely. This next feature is mutations. These are randomly chosen at the start of the game and change some aspect of the game mechanics. They change things like the base's starting health, attack and movement speed, income, things like that. The idea is that this would result in a combinatorial explosion of unique situations when combined with the map generation and your opponent's actions. It could also be tied to the theme of the game. For example, weather conditions or other parts in the environment could be the thematic explanations for these changes. I found I had to be really careful with which mechanics were changed. The point of this feature was to present the player with new challenges that they could apply their skill to. However, it often felt more like the game mechanics were being ripped out from under you and your previous learnings and intuitions no longer applied. Maybe this was because I've been playing the game for so long before adding these mutations, and maybe players who always had this would think it was fine, but I still need to iterate on this more and see how it could fit into the game. There are a whole bunch of other things I've added to the game since the last update I posted, like replays, improved pathfinding, and doing some networking and server optimization, but those can be topics for another devlog. Now, I have a question for you, dear viewer. Did any of the game mechanics I mentioned seem appealing to you? Did any of these mechanics make you really want to try the game out? I'm genuinely curious to hear your honest opinions. Even if none of them sounded interesting, I'd be keen to hear that. I know this is a bit of a weird devlog in that it was mostly about features I've been thinking about instead of things I've actually added, but I hope it's still helpful in showing where I'm planning to take the game, and also just letting you know that the game isn't dead. You might be thinking that this doesn't sound like a year and a half worth of work, and you'd be right. I took a break for most of the past year, but I'm back on track now. I don't have an exact upload schedule planned, but Expect updates at least slightly more regularly now.